He stepped out of the forest alone. No sound, no sign of life around him. Only a large figure, a German shepherd. Its fur matted with snow, mud, and dried blood, cracked paws, bleeding lightly against the frozen ground. And the eyes that looked as if they had seen far more than any human ever could bear. No collar, no ID tag, no one behind him, just him, walking slowly, like a creature that had survived a world that had already collapsed. Cars passed by, headlights cut through the snowy curtain, but no one stopped. Some drivers swerved to another lane, others just glanced over and looked away, as if the dog's very gaze frightened them. Rex didn't beg, didn't howl, he just looked. That gaze, solemn and steady, like a wordless voice saying, "I'm not lost, I'm looking for someone who can hear." Then he turned away, didn't run, just quietly veered onto a snow-covered path and vanished into the cold white silence. A few miles ahead at a bend in the road, Zelda Quinn, a patrol officer in the town of Silver Hollow, was driving across a layer of thin ice on the road. The sky had gone dark since early afternoon. The snowstorm had arrived earlier than forecast. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, eyes scanning the snow-covered trees on either side. It was second nature to her, honed from years working in Boulder, where she'd seen too many go missing after wandering just a few yards into the woods. Zelda wasn't someone easily swayed by emotion. She was tall, athletic, her auburn hair tied back neatly, a serious, quiet face, a woman her colleagues often said. Even in her dreams, she's planning her exit route. But today, something felt off. The air was too quiet, as if the silence itself was whispering that something buried was about to resurface. The radio crackled, static and broken signals. Then Zelda saw it. At the bend, through the falling snow, a black figure moved. Not a deer, not a bear. Low, solid, muscular. A dog. Zelda pressed the brakes gently. The vehicle slid slightly before stopping. She squinted through the windshield, wiping off the snow. The animal stood still. Large, dark, matted fur, one hind leg limping, bones protruding under damp skin. But it was those amber eyes that froze her in place. They didn't plead. They didn't cry for help. They just looked straight at her. Deep, silent. She opened the door and stepped out. Snow cracked beneath her boots. The wind slipped under her collar, sharp as invisible claws raking down her neck. "Hey there," Zelda said softly, voice just calm enough not to scare it. She crouched low, one hand extended, palm open. "Are you lost?" The dog took a step. Then another. Slow, purposeful. Rex came closer, his breath dissolving into the cold air like thin smoke. Then, he turned away. Walked, not fleeing, but leading. Zelda stood up, watching the limping figure fade into the pine forest. She didn't know why, only that she had to follow. Some vague instinct, or perhaps something greater than instinct, had begun to stir in her chest. Zelda picked up the radio. "Dispatch, this is Quinn. I've encountered a large German shepherd. No collar. Appears injured but behaviorally, it has direction. I'm going to follow. We'll report back." She cut the transmission, opened the back of her vehicle, took a flashlight, handcuffs, a small knife, and a lighter, half out of routine, half because she believed she was about to face something she'd never seen before. And as she stepped into the trail of paw prints in the snow, Zelda had no idea that each step was bringing her closer to a story that would change many lives forever. And that the name she was just about to give this dog in her mind would stay with her always. Rex. Rex didn't look back. He just kept walking, steadily, though it was clear each step sent a sharp jolt of pain through his hind leg. Zelda followed, maintaining a distance of about 3 meters, her flashlight sweeping across towering pine trunks like sleepless forest sentinels. The snow kept falling, thin but relentless. The sky seemed to have no color, just a pale gray veil draping every direction. Zelda felt as if she had stepped into another world, where language had been traded for instinct, where there were no traffic laws, no authority granted by a police badge. Here, there was only a wounded creature leading the way, and her. A human being, trying to read a map she'd never been taught. Rex stopped suddenly. He turned his head, his eyes no longer asking a question. They were confirming something. "We've arrived, haven't we?" Zelda whispered, though she knew she wouldn't receive an answer in words. Ahead was a shallow dip in the ground between two large trees. A thick pine canopy shielded the snow below, revealing something dark, protruding from the earth like a scar of metal. Zelda stepped closer. A cylindrical device, covered in snow and dead leaves. Old, but not unfamiliar. She knelt down, using her gloved hand to clear the ice. Then she froze for a moment. A military-grade emergency signal transmitter. On its torn nylon strap was a metal tag. Dirtied but still legible. Property of Chris Holloway. Zelda's heart pounded like a drum inside her chest. She knew that name. Chris Holloway. The renowned K-9 handler who had gone missing 2 days ago during the simulated avalanche training. The search team had scoured the entire western ridge, but found nothing. Until now. Zelda turned to Rex. The dog was already sitting, head bowed low, as if waiting for her to understand. You were his partner. Zelda whispered. Rex didn't move, but his silence rang out like a bell of recognition. She couldn't explain it in words, but she knew with certainty. Rex hadn't run away after the accident. He had stayed, guarding the signal. Waiting, guiding, holding out for the right person. Zelda turned on her radio, her hand still resting on the device. Dispatch. This is Quinn. I've located an emergency transmitter belonging to Chris Holloway. Coordinates. 40 degrees 12 minutes north, 105 degrees 17 minutes west. Device confirmed active, but the handler is still missing. There's a dog present. I believe it's Holloway's K-9 partner. She paused briefly, then added, I'm going to continue following. This dog knows something I don't. The radio was silent for a few seconds. Then the dispatch replied. Confirmed. Coordinates match Holloway's last ping. Proceed with caution. We're dispatching a search team to your location. Zelda clipped the flashlight back onto her jacket, her hand gently brushing against Rex's back. His fur was coarse like dry roots, frozen with dew, yet he held his head high. Let's go, Rex, she said softly. Show me what you want me to see. And once again, they moved forward, a woman and a dog, quietly making their way through a forest so deep. Even the maps had forgotten it. In the distance, the wind howled, like the call of a soul that had yet to find peace. And Zelda, with every step sinking deeper into the snow, felt more certain. This journey wasn't just about finding someone lost. It was about retrieving something she herself had long left behind. The snow grew thicker as Rex led Zelda off the trail, deeper into the ancient forest. All sounds became blurred. Only the wind threading through pine canopies and the crunch of soles pressing into frozen ground remained. The entire forest seemed to hold its breath, silently watching each step they took. Rex never lost direction. Though limping, the dog moved with terrifying resolve. Every pause was a signpost. Every glance over his shoulder seemed to ask, "Are you still with me?" Zelda said nothing. She just nodded and kept walking. 10 minutes later, as the pine trees grew sparse, the faint light of dusk pierced the heavy clouds, shining down onto a shallow basin littered with broken branches and a long, sunken line in the snow. Rex stopped, raised his head, then barked softly, the first sound Zelda had heard from him. She approached. On the snow were 2 long slide marks, dragging diagonally into a deep ravine, ending at a point where the snow had been violently clawed. Nearby, a torn safety strap poked out of the snow, far too familiar. The kind used in avalanche training equipment. Zelda dropped to her knees. Her hands trembled as she brushed away the snow, and then she saw something familiar. A dark red leash with a K-9 training tag. Name: C. Holloway. Rex didn't move. He just sat behind her, ears standing tall, watching. Zelda called into dispatch. I found a torn training lead belonging to Chris Holloway. There are slide marks, likely an accident. Sending coordinates now. Need search and medical teams immediately. As she ended the call, she heard a noise behind her, a snow vehicle approaching. A large gray van emerged from the forest's edge, headlights piercing the heavy snowfall. 2 people jumped out. One was Cole Dawes, a burly rescue specialist, his beard completely white with snow. The other made Zelda freeze. June Holloway, Chris's younger sister. A petite girl in a red puffer jacket, pale brown eyes deep with emotion, a beanie tilted to one side, soaked boots, and a heart trembling as if it might break. June froze when she saw Rex. She said nothing, didn't approach, just stared, silent. Rex turned around, slowly walked toward her, head lowered, amber eyes looking straight into her face, then sat down. June whispered, almost only in her own heart. Just like Jasper, he used to look at me the same way. Zelda stepped closer. You recognize this dog? June shook her head gently. No, but I know that look. I know the way it waits for me to come closer. Zelda looked at Rex, then at the deep slide in the snow. She no longer had any doubt. Rex hadn't gotten lost. He hadn't stumbled upon the transmitter. He had stayed, waited, led the way. A guardian in the form of an animal, loyal not out of command, but out of love. Cole began setting up an emergency campsite, while Zelda, June, and Rex continued along the trail. Wind howled across the ridge, and their poles punched into the snow like a racing heartbeat. Suddenly Rex let out a low growl, then broke from the group, sprinting southeast, toward a narrow path hidden beneath heavy foliage. Rex, Zelda called, but she didn't wait. He's leading us again, she said to Cole. Then Zelda took off running. Across the snowy bank, she nearly slipped when she saw something caught between two slabs of stone, a survival backpack. Unzipped, torn fabric, faintly embroidered with a name, Chris. Right beside it was a hastily folded map, edges torn by wind, but one handwritten note remained clear. Cabin, northeast, shelter. Zelda looked up. Wind brushed the back of her neck. Rex was waiting a few meters away, standing between two moss-covered pines, like a guide showing the way to the fragile edge of a miracle. She turned and shouted, found a map pointing to a shelter. Chris may have tried crawling toward the cabin. June, panting, but her eyes now flickering with hope, kept close behind. They didn't speak much. They just started running, because at that moment, every passing minute could mean the difference between life and death. The cabin didn't appear right away. It hid itself among old trees bent like arms covered in frost. Its roof collapsed on one side from the weight of snow. Wooden walls gray and worn by mountain wind and time. If not for that nearly decayed old map, and for Rex, they might have passed it by like any other nameless ruin. Zelda stepped forward, her hand resting on the cracked wooden door. Rex didn't whine, didn't bark. He simply sat at the threshold, head bowed low as if waiting for someone to wake up. Zelda took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The hinges let out a dry creak. The smell of mildew, rotting wood, and old blood drifted out like the final whisper of someone who had waited too long. The room was dim, lit only by the grayish light reflecting off snow through gaps in the roof. And then Zelda saw him. Chris Holloway, lying in the corner of the room, curled beneath a torn blanket, military jacket wrinkled and soiled, one leg swollen and wrapped in branches and makeshift bandages. A canteen lay tipped over beside him. His hand rested near his chest, frozen but still faintly trembling. Rex stepped in first. No sound, no jumping. He just walked up to Chris and rested his head on the man's shoulder, as if he'd held that place all these days, only leaving briefly to find help. Zelda rushed forward, kneeling beside him. Her fingers touched Chris's neck. There was a pulse. Weak, but there. She immediately activated the radio. This is Quinn. I found Chris Holloway. Alive. Semi-conscious. Severe dehydration. Hypothermia. Probable fracture in the right leg. Sending emergency coordinates now. Medical chopper needs to be dispatched immediately. Behind her, June stood frozen in the doorway. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just raised her hand to her mouth and bent forward, like someone being handed back a heart that had once been lost. Zelda opened her pack, pulled out a thermal bag, emergency blanket, and glucose. She spoke to Chris even though she knew he couldn't respond. You're not alone. Rex brought us here. He never left you. Rex looked at Zelda, and for the first time, she saw that a dog's eyes could show gratitude. Not because she had helped, but because she had understood. 10 minutes later, the sound of rotor blades roared in the distance. Snow curled in the air like feathers. A young female medic rushed into the cabin, crouching down to check Chris's vitals. When she touched his hand, Rex shifted only slightly, offering no resistance, but never left his post. Is he yours? She asked Zelda. Zelda shook her head. No. She looked toward Chris. He's his. As the stretcher was lifted off the ground, gliding along a cable winch, Chris opened his eyes for a moment. And the last thing he saw before the helicopter doors closed was Rex. He didn't bark, didn't try to follow. He just stood there, ears perked, gaze unwavering, as if saying something that didn't need to be spoken. I kept my promise. I waited, and now I've brought you home. Zelda remained beside Rex. She sat down, placing a hand on his back. He's alive because of you, she whispered. No training manual teaches that. You chose to do the right thing. Rex didn't respond. He just looked up at the sky, where the helicopter disappeared behind the thinning curtain of snow. June came closer. She didn't touch Rex. She simply sat beside him, gently leaning back against the cabin's worn wooden frame. Zelda said to her, "Maybe miracles don't always come with thunder. Sometimes they come with bloodied paws, waiting eyes, and a dog that refused to leave." And for the first time in many months, June smiled, very faintly, but enough to crack the ice that had sealed her heart. Outside, the wind still blew through the pine canopies. But it was no longer the wind of loneliness. It was the wind of return, of hope that arrived just in time. 3 days after the rescue, the storm had retreated from Silver Hollow, leaving the sky open in an unusually pale blue. Thick layers of snow had begun to melt, dripping down rooftops and tracing cold streaks across old window panes. At the Silver Hollow Animal Recovery Center, a modest red brick building near the edge of the forest, the first sunlight streamed through a tall window, casting light across the tiled floor where Rex lay. He wasn't asleep. He simply lay still, head resting on his front paws, amber eyes open, tracking every sound from the room next door, where Chris Holloway was being treated. Dr. Meredith Cole, the center's director, a woman in her 50s with neatly cropped salt and pepper hair and a face rarely touched by emotion, stood observing from the glass room. She spoke softly to Zelda, who stood beside her. He wouldn't eat until June came in. Zelda glanced over at Rex, giving a slight nod. He's not recovering. He's keeping watch. Meredith clicked her tongue and raised an eyebrow, a rare display from a woman who had spent her life working with abandoned animals. I used to think healing was a process. But maybe, for animals like Rex, it's instinct. June entered the room with a wool scarf, a small container of bone broth, and a fabric-wrapped book of poems. She said nothing. She simply sat beside Rex, as naturally as if she had done it all her life. Rex didn't lift his head, but his tail tapped once softly on the floor, then fell still. June placed her hand down, letting Rex decide for himself. After a while, he slowly raised his head and pressed his nose into her palm. June smiled, for the second time in many months. "Hello, my hero." In the room next door, Zelda sat beside Chris's bed. The man was now more alert. His leg was in a cast, an IV steadily feeding into his arm, his beard trimmed back, and in his eyes, something had returned. Not the light of full recovery, but the light of someone who had once lost faith, and just found it again. Zelda poured him a cup of weak hospital coffee from a thermos. "You still haven't told me the full story about Rex." Chris held the cup with both hands, fingers still trembling slightly. "I thought I'd never have to tell it. He was trained at the Northern K-9 station, but he didn't respond well to standard combat commands. He didn't obey orders, but reacted instantly to human emotion." Zelda leaned back in her chair, narrowing her eyes. "He wasn't looking for people. He was looking for fractured souls?" Chris nodded. Slowly, "We visited psychiatric wards, orphanages after trauma, PTSD veteran centers. Rex didn't need instructions. He just knew. The way he looked at people, it was like he could read the pain inside them." Zelda was silent for a moment. Then she whispered, "There's nothing in Rex's file about any of that." Chris gave a tired smile. "I never filed a report. When I left the unit, I wiped his data. No one understood Rex. They wanted to program him like a tool. But he was born to do something else. To preserve the last part of our humanity." In the hallway, June was reading poetry softly beside Rex. She didn't know Zelda was watching through the glass door. Nor did she know that Zelda, a woman who had never cared for poetry or therapy dogs, was feeling something she couldn't quite describe. As if she had just witnessed something immense unfold in silence. Zelda stepped out into the hallway where Dr. Meredith was jotting notes. "Can he return to duty?" Zelda asked. Meredith shook her head. "Biologically, yes. But after everything Rex has just been through? If we force him back into the old regime, I'm not sure his soul would survive. Zelda paused and thought. Then, what if we let him choose? Meredith looked up, serious. Zelda, he already has. She pointed toward the room, where Rex lay with his head resting on June's legs, eyes half closed, at peace for the first time since he left the forest. Zelda nodded slightly. A soft smile formed, barely noticeable, but it was her first smile after years in law enforcement. That day, Zelda quietly returned to the police station and opened a blank case file. She wrote the title on the cover of her first project. Project Rex. Reborn from Silence. That morning, the sky over Silver Hollow was strangely clear. The snow had begun melting along the forest paths, revealing damp moss carpets and soft brown earth beneath the early sunlight. The pines no longer howled like they had during the blizzards. They whispered something gentler. Today was the final test. In the backyard of the Silver Hollow Animal Recovery Center, a metal gate was opened. Beyond it, the path split in two directions. One led toward the northern pine forest, where Rex had once survived, where he was part of the wild, of instinct. The other led to a small playground for children with disabilities, where there were wheelchairs, tactile mats, and the broken bursts of laughter from a few children playing under the watchful eyes of therapy specialists. Zelda stood beside Rex, holding a soft fabric leash, but not attaching it to his collar. No commands today, Rex, she said in a low voice. No one's making you choose. You decide. Choose your way. Rex stood still, silent as stone. A light breeze passed by, making the small metal tag on his collar gently clink. Rex, guardian. He turned his head toward the forest. Inhaled deeply. A familiar scent, pine roots, old snow, and the whispers of nature, where he once belonged, once fought, once endured. Then he turned toward the playground. The smell of fresh plastic, soft grass, the sound of wheelchair wheels spinning over rubber flooring. And there, a small boy struggling to rebuild a wooden toy tower, his little legs strapped in metal braces, moving stiffly and with effort. No one called, no one coaxed. Rex looked at both paths as if listening to both places call his name. One was freedom, the other was purpose. He walked, not rushed, not hesitant, toward the playground. The first child to touch Rex was Mina, 5 years old, severely autistic. She never spoke, avoided eye contact, and often recoiled from physical contact. But when Rex lay down beside the play mat, his head lowered to the ground, Mina walked over. She placed her hand on his back. No one instructed her, no one taught her, and Rex didn't move. Just stayed still, like a warm, breathing stone. Outside the fence, Zelda exhaled softly. He's made his choice. In the hallway, June leaned against the glass doorway, gripping her vet school application in her hands. Meredith Cole approached her and nodded toward the yard. You finished filling it out? June gave a small nod. Just need to send it. Meredith raised an eyebrow with a rare smile. You didn't come back for your old job. You came back for him, didn't you? June smiled gently, not denying it. Maybe, I needed someone to teach me how to stay. Rex does that better than anyone. A little while later, Rex was brought back inside. Not for training, but to receive a new role. A soft blue therapy vest was gently draped over his back. June bent down to fasten the straps, while Zelda observed from afar. No medals, no deployment orders, but from today, he's this town's therapy companion. That sentence was never spoken aloud. It simply existed, like a quiet vow, when an autistic child pressed their cheek against Rex and whispered something unintelligible, but that everyone instinctively understood as thank you. That evening, Zelda returned to the police station and cleared off her desk. She placed a small wooden sign next to a stack of files. Project Rex, no commands, only love. And beneath that, she added a line, almost as if to remind herself. He didn't choose to return to the forest. He chose to stay, so that those who are lost can find their way back home. News of Rex spread quickly. Across every wooden fence, through the fogged-up windows glowing with early morning light, and from one steaming coffee cup to another in the small cafe on the corner of Main Street. They didn't say much. Silver Hollow had always been a quiet town. But this time, they listened more, watched more, felt more. It wasn't just about a dog who saved a life. It was about a soul that knew how to wait, how to stay, and how to love, without ever needing to be taught. In a rare town hall meeting, Zelda, in her neatly pressed uniform, stood in front of a whiteboard with a thin file in her hands. "I'm not here to ask for permission," she said, voice calm but resolute. "I'm here to invite." Behind her was a large printed photo. Rex lying beside a little girl painting with watercolor, purple, blue, and a smear of yellow like sunlight. "We don't build centers to cage the dogs who've survived the storm," Zelda said. "We build places so that the storms within people can finally settle, thanks to creatures who've never learned how to lie." The first person to stand was Ed Ramsey, a silver-haired veteran with a cane, eyes that had seen war and death. He spoke slowly, but clearly. "I lost a friend in the winter of '73. Not from the cold, but because no one asked if he was cold. If there's a place where people like us aren't left behind in silence, then I'll clean out that damn storage room every day of the year just to keep it running." The room fell silent. Then applause broke out. Not loud, but steady, enough to wake a town. A week later, the project was officially approved. The Rex way. Not with a big budget. Not with a flashy logo. But with steady, quiet actions. A group of local carpenters volunteered to transform the old storage barn into a therapy center. The elementary school submitted a list of 8 children in need of emotional support after personal loss. A class of 9th graders began painting a mural of a brown dog lying beneath pine trees. Throughout it all, Rex never left the place he'd chosen. He still went to the playground each morning. Still lay quietly beside the children who didn't speak. Still rested his head on someone's lap when they cried. Still did it all without needing a single word of praise. One afternoon, as the sun slid down behind the western ridge, Tessa, the girl who hadn't spoken since her father's death, approached Rex. She clutched a toy in her hand, a small stuffed dog. Her eyes locked onto Rex's. And then, in a voice barely more than a breath, Tessa said her second word in 2 years. "Stay." Zelda, standing at a distance, froze mid-step. June, tidying up therapy journals inside, dropped her pen. Rex didn't move. He just lowered his head into the little girl's palm, like a vow that needed no oath. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Zelda and June stood together under the wooden awning of the center. The snow hadn't fully melted, but the air no longer bit. The wind now passed like a quiet exhale. June turned to Zelda. "We didn't really do anything, did we?" Zelda smiled without turning. "No," Rex chose. "He just needed someone to stand still long enough to understand that." June looked at Rex, now resting peacefully, his head on a soft blue rubber mat. His eyes were half closed. Calm. And she whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe love doesn't need to be taught. Maybe it just needs someone brave enough to stay." And so the town awoke. Not because of a miracle, but because of a creature who never lost faith in humans. No one called Rex a healer. No one called him a hero. But from that day forward, they called him something simple, like a thank you that needed no explanation. The Keeper of Light. The small western wing of the center was called Whisper Hall. No large signs, no bright colors, just a row of simple rooms with soft wooden floors. Warm golden light like late afternoon sun and windows that opened straight into the pine forest. This was the place for children the world called silent. But Zelda didn't call them that. She called the place where they're learning to find their voice again. That afternoon, Tessa returned. She wore a light purple sweater and carried her worn-out stuffed dog. Her mother, Emily, sat quietly in the waiting room, as always, holding a cup of tea but never taking her eyes off the window slit. Inside Whisper Hall, Rex was already there. He lay on the center mat, motionless. Next to him, a soft cushion, a few boxes of crayons, and an unfinished drawing. A small house in the snow, with a silent shadow standing at the door. Tessa entered, light as mist. She didn't need to be guided. No one told her what to do. She just sat down, beside Rex. Some time passed, no one knew how long. And then the girl leaned her body, gently resting her head on his back. Rex didn't turn. He simply shifted, just enough not to startle her. And in that moment, the silent room made its first sound. Not a voice, but a deep inhale. Then, laughter. Soft, but real. Tessa giggled, like little bells in the snow. As Rex gently licked her hand, she didn't pull away. She laughed. For the first time in 2 years. Outside the window, Emily let go of her teacup. And wept. Not from sadness, but from waiting too long for this moment. The room kept opening its arms. Jonah, the boy with leg braces, stood up for the first time by himself, using Rex's shoulder like a living post. Lena, who feared loud sounds, sat beside Rex through her entire session without covering her ears. Cadden, the boy orphaned by fire, drew a son for the very first time. No one could explain why. They just knew. Every time Rex walked into the room, the air changed. No smell of medicine, no ticking clock, no pressure to get better. Only a creature who knew how to wait, how to listen, and how to love, even if no one said a word. That weekend night, Zelda sat in her office, reviewing notes from the therapists. Tessa laughed. Jonah stood. Cadden drew sunshine. At the bottom of one page, someone had written in blue ink, "The room is no longer a room. It's a heart. And Rex is its first heartbeat." Zelda closed the notebook. She stood, looking out the window where the lights of Whisper Hall still glowed, like a candle in the dark. June stood there too, leaning against the doorframe, backpack in hand. "Not going home tonight?" Zelda asked. June shook her head. "Not yet. I'm staying tonight." "So is he." Zelda was quiet for a while, then softly asked, "Do you think Rex knows what he's doing?" June smiled, a kind smile, unlike any she'd worn before. "I think he's never forgotten what he was born to do." This story, about a dog who wouldn't leave his dying friend in the snow. About a frozen town now echoing with soft laughter. About a little girl who whispered, "Stay," after 2 years of silence. Has never made the news. There's no viral video. No front-page headline. Only a Whisper Hall. A red brick wing. A few children. A handful of mended hearts. And one dog lying among them. His name is Rex. But in the center's internal records, there's one short line of description. Not clinical. Not administrative. Just 3 words. He waits well. And sometimes, that's enough. Someone who doesn't walk away. Someone who knows how to wait. So that good things can find their way back. On the southern edge of Silver Hollow stood an old building with peeling paint, dusty windows, and a nameplate nearly broken in half. Locals called it the Mountain Ridge Veteran Center. No one came by often. No one asked much. Not because they didn't care, but because they simply didn't know where to begin. Inside were quiet men, veterans with silver hair, deep-set eyes, hands as rough as stone. Men who had once carried rifles through war zones and returned, carrying storms no one could see. One couldn't sleep. Another never spoke. One just sat staring out the window for years, waiting for something, even he no longer remembered. Zelda visited for the first time on a Friday afternoon. With Rex. She brought no files, gave no speeches. She simply walked Rex through the door. In the first few seconds, every eye turned. A few frowned. One man shook his head. Another scoffed. "What's this doing here? A therapy dog?" Zelda said nothing. Neither did Rex. He walked to the center of the dimly lit room, where the gray afternoon light seeped through the curtains, and sat, waiting. Nearly 20 minutes passed. Still silence. Rex didn't bark, didn't stare too long, didn't move. Then the old man at the far end, Ed Ramsey, the same who had once spoken in favor of the project, tilted his head slightly. He patted the seat beside him, eyes wary but not cold. "You here for me, huh?" Rex stood, walked over. No rush, no hesitation. He sat by Ed's leg, back resting gently against his thigh, as if they'd known each other from another life. Ed let out a soft laugh, the kind of sound lungs forget how to make. From the hallway, Zelda said nothing. She just watched, as another door slowly opened, thanks to a creature who knew how to wait. From that week on, Rex became a regular at the Veteran Center. No appointments, no name tag, just showing up in the late afternoons, when old ghosts stirred the loudest. He sat beside the man who talked in his sleep, laid beneath the chair of the one who wouldn't eat, pressed his head to the knee of a man gripping an old photo of his wife and son, that no one dared ask about. Zelda wrote in the internal therapy journal, "Rex doesn't do anything, but somehow, whoever sits with him manages to do something they haven't done in years." One evening, Rex arrived later than usual. By the time he entered, the room had already gone quiet after rare murmurs of conversation. A silver-haired man, Daryl Henson, 62, a former rescue medic in Afghanistan, was trembling, clutching an unsent letter. Zelda started to step in, but Rex was already ahead. He said nothing, just gently placed his head on Daryl's lap, eyes half closed, as if to say, "I'll be here when you're ready." After a few minutes, Daryl whispered, "I never cried after coming back. But with you here, I don't have to hold it in anymore." And Rex, as always, just leaned his head in deeper. The town began to whisper, "That dog can read people's hearts." A vet smiled for the first time in 7 years because of a dog that never barked. An animal healed souls like a doctor without a coat. Zelda never called Rex a miracle. She simply said, "He doesn't try to heal anyone. He just stays. And sometimes, that's all we really need." A month later, on the main wall of Whisper Hall, the therapists pinned a new photo. Not of a child, but of Rex sitting beside Ed Ramsey. The two of them looking out the window. Sunlight lit the lines on Ed's brow, and Rex's fur glowed like a soft halo around his neck. Beneath it, handwritten by June, "Some carry the torch, others keep it from fading." From that day forward, people started calling Rex by a new name. Not official, not written on any form. The Lightkeeper. No one taught him how. He chose, just as he once chose to walk out of a snowstorm, chose to stay with those who had lost their voices, and chose to lay his head on the lap of someone breaking inside, saying through silence, "I still see you, even if the world no longer does." Spring arrived late in Silver Hollow. Snow still clung to the mountain slopes, but the pine trees had begun to bud. The little stream behind the rehabilitation center cracked open for the first time in 3 months. Its gentle trickle sounded like a forgotten lullaby the whole town had once known. And in that in-between season, something began to bloom. Not a program, not a movement, but a quiet miracle, planted by a silent dog named Rex. There were no loudspeakers at the ceremony. No red carpet, just a strip of forest green ribbon, stretched between 2 rough wooden posts beneath the center's porch. Behind it stood the new building, the Rexway Center, with wide open windows looking out toward the forest, and a pinewood hallway named Whisper Walk. The children arrived first. Some walked on their own, some in wheelchairs. A few held their parents' hands tightly, but all wore radiant faces. The adults followed. Some still walked slowly, but their eyes no longer shied away from each other's gaze. Chris Holloway stepped forward first, leaning lightly on his cane. Simple shirt. Eyes now carried depth instead of confusion. June stood beside him, holding the scissors, her smile warm and soft like the first spring sun. Zelda, in her police uniform, this time without a badge, but with a small silver pine pin, stood quietly watching Rex, who sat in the center of the stone-paved courtyard. No leash, no command, no signal. He simply sat there, the still point around which the world turned. As June bent down, Rex gently raised his head. She touched it softly. "Are you ready?" she whispered. There was no answer, but Rex's tail thumped the ground twice. Slow, steady. June cut the ribbon. No fireworks, no drums, just a round of soft applause, scattered like the first snowflakes of winter. And every eye, young and old, broken and healed, turned to the creature who had said nothing, but had taught them all how to stay. A week later, the Silent Companion program officially began. Each morning, a small group of children and adults gathered at Whisper Walk to wait with Rex. No games, no lessons, just sitting together, breathing, listening to the wind, and learning how not to rush. Zelda wrote in the therapy journal, "He didn't teach us how to run toward happiness, but how to sit still until happiness was brave enough to return." On a spring afternoon, with light pouring through the pines, Tessa, now able to form full sentences, sat beside Rex and read him a story. Jonah lay stretched on a mat, leg braces relaxed, drawing a new picture. And Rex, just like always, asked for nothing. He simply was, quiet like a mirror, in which everyone saw a gentler version of themselves. At the end of the day, a group of adults gathered under the trees where Whisper Walk ended. They built a small stone pedestal, and carved into it a simple line. He didn't follow orders, He followed hearts. Rex didn't stand near it. He only watched from afar. Then slowly turned his head toward the forest. Not to leave, but as if to remind them. He had found his way home. In the final meeting of the therapy council, Zelda said, "I used to think Rex came here to save someone. But maybe he came to restore the belief in miracles." June nodded. Chris tightened his grip on his cane. Dr. Meredith wrote the last line in the internal report. "There's no medicine named Rex. But if there were, I think the world would be a far better place." And so, in the days that followed, when someone came to Silver Hollow wondering what had changed this town, they often didn't notice right away. They just saw a child sitting quietly under a tree, arms around a dark brown dog, a veteran looking at the sky, without lighting a cigarette, a young woman returning to medical school, her hands no longer trembling when she held someone else's. And if they stayed long enough, they'd begin to hear stories of a dog who once walked out of the woods alone, and never let anyone else feel that kind of loneliness again. May in Colorado is an unpredictable time. Some days, the sky is blue as glass. Other days, the cold rains feel like winter's return. And then there are days like that day, when the whole town of Silver Hollow stood before a choice: to keep the light for themselves, or to let it travel farther, to places where it was needed more. At Whisper Hall, Rex was lying in his usual corner. Tessa sat right next to him, reading a picture book. No one told her to read aloud, but she did it anyway. Outside, Zelda, June, and Chris were meeting with two representatives from a therapy organization based in Denver. The man with salt and pepper hair, who introduced himself as Dr. Rowan Yates, placed a file on the table. His voice was deep, slow, but clear. "We have a facility on the outskirts of Denver, a day shelter for adolescents with histories of self-harm or abandonment. Some of them don't respond to verbal therapy. No one's able to touch them." June flipped through a map, her eyes growing thoughtful. Rowan continued, "We heard about Rex from a veteran doctor. That person said, 'Don't send a psychologist. Send that dog first.'" The room fell silent for a moment. Zelda crossed her arms, gazing out the window where Rex still lay motionless, as if asleep in the center of life. "If he goes," she said slowly, "we can't force him to return. We've never given Rex an order." Chris added, "He doesn't belong to anyone. But he stays, because of someone." June smiled gently. "And maybe it's time he moves on. Because someone else is waiting now." That afternoon, Zelda personally took Rex out of town. For the first time since the day they found him in the forest. The old pickup rolled across Timberline Pass, through damp roads and changing fields. Rex lay in the back, head resting on a worn wool blanket. But his eyes were far from dreamy. He was awake, observant, silent, like a spiritual sentry. The facility they arrived at was a brown brick building, tall fences, sloped roof, a place where children no longer believed anyone would come back for them. Rex stepped into the yard the same way he once entered Whisper Hall. No introduction, no haste, no fear. A red-haired boy, 12 years old, leaned against the wall with folded arms. His eyes were cold, unblinking. Zelda stepped back. Rex approached, stopped, sat, and simply waited. The boy frowned. Rex didn't move. 1 minute, 5. Then, the boy quietly sat down. No one said a word. But everyone saw it. A door had opened, not with a handle, but with the gaze of a dog who knew how to stay. And so the journey began. From Silver Hollow to Denver. From silent rooms to muffled sighs. In every place, Rex didn't seek the strongest. He sought those trying hardest not to fall apart. He didn't need to know their names, only to feel pain unspoken. At a nursing home in Boulder, Rex lay silently at the feet of an elderly woman, once a music teacher. When her frail hand touched his head, she sang, for the first time in 6 years. At a special education class in Fort Collins, Rex didn't play with the group. He lay beside a boy with autism who spun a pen endlessly. After 2 hours, the boy set the pen down and rested his head on Rex's belly. At an interrogation room in Littleton Police Department, Rex was brought in when a teenage boy refused all lawyers and psychologists. After 30 minutes of silence beside Rex, he broke down and whispered, "I didn't want to do it." Zelda tracked the journey from afar. June kept a journal called Rex's Footprints, recording every reaction, every look, every moment of rebirth. Chris quietly sent the center handmade therapy harnesses, embroidered with the names of the children Rex had sat beside. At the Silver Hollow Center, a wall was dedicated to the Wall of the Lead, where everyone who had encountered Rex was invited to write one word. Just one. No explanation needed. It could be stay, or safe, or finally. And there was one, typed in shaky letters. Me. Once, while sitting beneath Whisper Walk, Zelda asked June, "Do you think he knows what he's planting?" June was quiet for a long while, then answered softly, "No, but he knows where the light is needed. And like any seed at the right time, he goes, so that others may bloom." And so, Rex was no longer just the keeper of light. He became the sower of light. No one gave him commands. No one set his schedule. Only him, amber eyes, and a story never spoken, yet understood by hundreds. Summer afternoons in Silver Hollow were warmer than usual. The breeze was still gentle. The sunlight still slanted softly. But something in the air made people slow their steps without knowing why. Zelda sat alone in the courtyard of the center, a cup of cold coffee beside her. The wind brushed through her neatly tied hair. Her eyes remained fixed on the red dirt road leading into town, as if waiting for something that never needed an announcement. And then, the sound of tires on gravel. Not fast, not urgent, just enough to make her heart skip a beat. The silver-white pickup truck came to a quiet stop beside the pine trees. The door opened, and Rex stepped down. No one called his name. No one cheered. There was only a silence so full, like sunlight entering a room that had been dark all year. Zelda didn't stand. She waited. Rex walked over, each step unhurried, those amber eyes still the same, but deeper somehow, as if, in every moment of waiting, he had returned with an entire silent world still longing to be heard. He stopped in front of her, lowered his head into her palm, and let out a long, steady breath. An hour later, something unprecedented happened at Whisper Hall. Rex sat in the center of the courtyard, as he always did, but this time, he was not alone. Clara, age 14, once unresponsive in the Denver Youth Facility, now sat beside him, reading poetry like a soft running stream. Jerome, the veteran who had tried to end his life 3 times, was now in charge of tending the back garden, sweeping pine needles, as if arranging the pieces of his life. Darian, the autistic boy from Fort Collins, was pinning a photo on the wall of the lead, a picture of Rex nestled in his arms, both of them asleep. Zelda watched them as if in quiet disbelief. All of them once labeled, on the margins. Now, they were at the center of something sacred. No one needed to call it a miracle, because everyone already knew. Only presence, long and unconditional, could hold that kind of power. That evening, for the first time in many years, the town of Silver Hollow held an outdoor bonfire. No fanfare, just an acoustic guitar, a few humble voices, and real stories. Zelda stood beside June and Chris. Tessa, now the youngest assistant at Whisper Hall, was telling the other children about the first day Rex said nothing, and somehow made me cry in relief. Jerome poured tea for a newly arrived elder. Clara played chords. Darian drew Rex's image in the sand. And Rex still lay there, in the circle of firelight, eyes half closed, ears still listening, as if he knew the light he once carried far had finally found its way home. That night, Zelda sat alone in her office. She opened a drawer and took out an old envelope, the handwriting careful and quiet. "If anyone finds Rex, please tell him, thanks to him, I'm still here." From someone who once wanted to disappear. She folded it back. She didn't need to know who wrote it, because Zelda understood. Rex didn't need to know who was saying thank you. He only needed to know someone stayed. On the final wall of Whisper Hall, June mounted a new frame. It wasn't a photo, nor a quote, just a small mirror. And beneath it, a hand-carved line. "If you were ever led by Rex, look here. And remember, you were the light too." Rex hadn't aged much, but he didn't need to stay young forever. Because with every soul he touched, with every heart he waited beside, with every moment he stayed until the tears were done, he left behind a part of himself. A piece of light. And light always knows the way back. Unseasonal snow fell. In early October, the town of Silver Hollow was unexpectedly swept by a cold front, covering every rooftop, every pine branch, and every trail that autumn had nearly dried. Zelda was patrolling the western ridge, the very place where she had once found Rex. Years ago, as her vehicle rounded a narrow bend, the headlights caught something that shouldn't have been there. A small figure curled up, naked, lying in the snow. Zelda slammed the brakes. Her heart thudded like a war drum. She stepped out. A child. No coat, no hat, just a thin scrap of cloth wrapped around his body like a makeshift shroud. The boy didn't cry, didn't shiver. He simply looked up and locked eyes with her, as if he had known she would come. Zelda rushed forward, wrapped the freezing body in her arms. And in that moment, as her hands touched his skin, a strange sensation swept through her chest, as if she was the one being found. Back at Whisper Hall, June ran a full evaluation. No injuries, no bruising, but the brain is reacting as if it has experienced severe trauma. Chris searched statewide records. No missing child matched. The boy didn't speak, didn't write, didn't respond to anyone, except for one, Rex. When Rex walked into the room, the boy was lying motionless on a hospital bed. In that brief moment, they looked at each other, like two forgotten mirrors finally meeting. Rex walked forward. No tail wag, no bark. He simply stood a few steps away from the bed. The boy, rather than flinch, sat up abruptly. For the first time since being found, he reached out, not to be held, but to place his hand on Rex's head. From that day on, Rex didn't leave the small room the boy now called home. June tried music, drawings, light therapy. Nothing brought response, except Rex. When Rex left for dinner, the boy went still again, his eyes blank. When Rex returned, he sat up, drank water, touched the wall, looked out the window. Zelda sat beside the bed. Therapy journal open. On the first page, she wrote, "This is not a child who is hurt. This is a child who had disappeared." And then one night, a snowstorm swept through, and Whisper Hall lost power. The entire treatment wing plunged into pitch-black silence. Zelda checked each room with a flashlight. When she reached the boy's room, her breath stopped. Rex was gone. The internal alarm rang. Chris jumped in the truck. June called local police. They split up, searching through the whiteout, calling into the wind, until dawn broke. When the first golden ray pierced the silver mist, Zelda saw Rex, standing at the forest's edge, his eyes quiet like an ancient ghost. And beside him was the boy, not afraid, not lost, just standing there, one hand resting on Rex's back, eyes fixed into the forest, as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. Zelda approached slowly. "What's your name?" she asked. No answer. But the boy whispered, without looking at her, "I don't have one." Zelda knelt, eye to eye with him. "Do you want one?" The boy lowered his head. Rex stepped forward, touched her hand lightly, and in that moment, the wind shifted, the snow stopped, sunlight broke through, and the boy whispered, softly, only loud enough for Rex to hear, If I have a name, I won't disappear again, right?" Zelda took his hand, her voice trembling as if she herself was being reborn. "No, you won't disappear. And from now on, you'll carry your own light." And so, at Whisper Hall, a small nameplate was hung on the last door in the hallway. Eli, the one who was first called. Not because someone named him, but because he chose it. After listening to Rex breathe beside him for 3 nights straight, since the day Eli received his name, he was no longer just a shadow passing through hospital rooms. He didn't speak much, but his eyes saw deeper than most children's. Zelda often found him standing at the last window at the end of the hallway, gazing out toward the pine forest, as if waiting for something to return. And Rex never left his side. Wherever Eli sat, Rex lay. When Eli slept, Rex stayed awake. When Eli cried without a sound, Rex would gently press his muzzle to the boy's chest, as if trying to hold in place each heartbeat that wanted to flee. One morning, during a creative therapy class, June handed out blank sheets of paper. The children were asked to draw the safest place in their mind. Eli didn't draw. He simply put the pencil down, then lifted it, then set it down again. After 20 minutes, he turned away. Rex moved beside him, resting his head on Eli's foot. And then, Eli began to draw. Not a house, but a solitary door, standing alone in a snowy forest. No walls, no roof, just a door ajar, and on the doorknob, a claw mark, as if someone, or something, had tried desperately to keep it shut. June looked at the drawing. A chill ran down her spine. Eli, where did you see this door? He didn't answer, but his hand tightened gently around Rex's ear. On the other side of everything, he whispered. That night, Zelda reviewed Eli's medical file. No birth name, no matching fingerprints, no one searching for him. He seemed to have appeared from the space between two worlds. She flipped through the therapy journal. The last page held the only sentence Eli had ever written on his own. I didn't die, I got lost, and Rex found me. A week later, Chris organized an outdoor meditation session for the Silent Depression group. Eli didn't join, but after the session, he walked over to Chris at dusk. You wanted to die once, didn't you? Chris nodded, hiding nothing. And, what did you see right before deciding not to? Chris looked into the boy's eyes. I saw Rex. Not with my eyes. I saw that I still had worth in the way you looked at me. Eli nodded slowly. Then, if I saw Rex when no one was there, does that mean I was still alive? Chris didn't answer. He just reached out and brushed the boy's hair. And for the first time, Eli allowed an adult to touch him. That night, something unprecedented happened at Whisper Hall. Eli dreamed, and he spoke in his sleep. Zelda recorded it through the audio monitor in his room. Don't shut the door. I don't belong there. There's light, there's shadow, there's barking. Just one bark. Then the door opened, and I fell back here. The next morning, Eli drew another picture. No longer the door in the snow. This time, it was Rex, standing before a circular portal of light, like a reverse solar eclipse. Beyond the gate were shadowy silhouettes, human-like, but without faces. He handed the drawing to Zelda. His hand was cold, but his eyes glowed with a strange warmth. I'm not sure, Eli said softly, but maybe I used to be there. And Rex went through the door to find me. Zelda held the drawing tightly. But Rex is a dog. He can't go through doors like that. Eli tilted his head, as if she'd missed the simplest part of a fairy tale. No, but light can. And Rex is light-shaped like a dog. That night, Zelda sat alone in her office. She opened the national database for missing children. No name matched. No face belonged to Eli. She stared at the drawing again. The light gate, Rex, the silent figures beyond, and for the first time, she wondered, if a soul gets lost before it's born, who leads it back? Outside on the porch, Rex was asleep. Snow had begun to fall gently. But his eyes opened slightly, not from the cold, not from sound, but because somewhere, out there, another soul was approaching the door. And as always before, Rex would go, not on his feet, but as light. That morning, June received an email from a pediatric psychologist in the state of Utah. The subject line was simple. Is this the same child? She opened the attachment, a faint pencil sketch, drawn by a couple, from a recurring dream they had both shared for the past 3 years. A brown-haired boy with deep eyes, standing in the snow, always looking at them, every night. They had no children, had never been pregnant, but both dreamed of the same boy. June zoomed in on the image. Her hands began to tremble. It was Eli, Zelda, Chris, and June held an emergency meeting. Eli's file had been categorized as unexplained appearance. The boy had no documented past, no bodily trauma, no one searching for him. And now, someone was dreaming of him, as if he were a soul not yet born. Zelda leaned back in her chair, exhaled deeply. We're not just caring for a child. Maybe we're keeping a soul that once got lost between two worlds. That evening, Zelda walked into Eli's room. He was drawing a large circle, filled with tiny points of light like stars. But all of them were surrounded by mist. Eli, what are you drawing? He didn't look up. It's the place before names. The place I passed through. And I wasn't alone there. Zelda sat quietly beside him. Eli continued, in a whisper. There were many children like me. No one called them. No one showed them the way. But I saw Rex. He went into that place. His light pushed the mist away. And I followed. Zelda placed a hand on his shoulder. Her heart weighed heavy. Do you think those children are still there? Eli nodded. They still don't have names. 3 days later, June held a special therapy session. She called it, Draw What No One Sees. Each child was invited to draw something they dreamed, something no one had believed. Clara drew a spiral staircase among clouds. Tessa drew a shadowy figure standing in a flooded room. But Eli didn't draw anything. Instead, he walked to the large chalkboard in the hall, picked up a piece of black charcoal, and wrote, There are souls that do not die. They never went anywhere. They just got lost between the light and the voice that never came. That night, Whisper Hall felt unnaturally quiet. Zelda couldn't sleep. She went to the kitchen to make tea, but noticed the glass door by the porch was ajar. Outside, Rex was sitting, staring into the forest. No barking, no whining, no waiting, just ready. Eli stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. He walked straight to Rex. Without a coat, he hears the call again, Eli said, not turning back. Zelda clutched the wool scarf in her hands. Will he go further this time? Eli nodded. Farther than where drifting souls go, but never touch the ground. Rex stepped into the forest. Just like that first day Zelda had found him. No turning back, no hesitation. Eli held Zelda's hand. We don't need to follow. But, if one day he brings someone back, just believe it's the light remembering itself. 3 weeks later, Whisper Hall received a strange phone call. From an orphanage in New Mexico. A wandering child had been found. Near the forest edge. No memory. No identity. No one claiming him. But sewn onto the collar of his shirt was a small fabric tag. My name is Jonas. Beneath it, an embroidered paw print. Zelda gasped when she heard the news. Eli, coloring in class, looked up. Jonas was one of the ones without a name. Now he has one. June asked gently. How do you know? Eli smiled. His first real childlike smile. Because I heard barking in my dream. And this time, I wasn't the only one being called. Whisper Hall went still, as if holding its breath. On the great chalk wall, a sentence appeared, written in glowing powder. They're not lost. They're just waiting for someone to remember their name. And beneath it, a single paw print. Small, deep, alone, but walking toward the light. Since that winter, Whisper Hall changed part of its philosophy. It was no longer a place that simply healed old wounds. It became a place that called forth the names of souls who had never been welcomed. June launched a new program called The Journey to Find Your Name. No paperwork. No need to begin with, who are you? Only one question for every child who had wandered through life unclaimed. What do you want to be called? When you're no longer afraid? Eli became the first to lead the group. Not with lessons, but with quiet presence. Because those who have lived inside the fog know how to take someone else by the hand and walk them through it. Jonas, the child Rex had brought from New Mexico, was now the one who helped the newcomers write the first letter of their name. On the stone wall behind the center. Not to be recorded, but to admit, they had stepped into the light. Rex grew old. No one could say when it began. Just that one morning, Zelda noticed he didn't run out to the yard like before. He was lying in Eli's room. His head resting on the boy's arm, just like always. But now, it was Eli who lulled him to sleep. Whisper Hall erected a stone marker in the western garden, where wildflowers bloomed all year round. Engraved upon it, where souls remember their names. And beneath, in smaller text, and where the light no longer has to wander. On the final afternoon before the snow returned, Rex walked into the yard one last time. His steps were slow, but his eyes had not dimmed. Eli, now the one who kept journals for the newly arrived children, sat beside him. Zelda approached and gently stroked Rex's back. She asked Eli, do you think Rex will go on? Eli shook his head. No need anymore, because now, he's not the only one who knows how to find the lost. We do, too. Rex lay down beneath the bare maple tree. The air was still. The wind held its breath. And in that moment, all of Whisper Hall seemed to breathe as one. No one cried, because no one had lost anything. Only a light, after a long journey, had finally taken root. That night, by the fireplace, each child was invited to share the first dream, in which they were no longer alone. Clara spoke of a glowing forest, where someone always walked behind her, and she didn't need to look back to know. She was not abandoned, Jonas said he saw himself falling into a dark abyss, but a warm paw pressed against his chest, as if holding his final breath in place. Tessa told of a dream where a dog had waited outside her house since a lifetime ago, until she was old enough to open the door from the inside. Zelda quietly wrote in the end-of-day journal, "No one truly disappears if someone holds their name, even in silence." And Rex was the living memory of every soul that had never been called. That year, winter in Silver Hollow wasn't as bitter as before, because within Whisper Hall, among children who now knew how to call one another by name, and among doors no longer closed, there was a small paw print in the snow, no longer pressed deeply, because light no longer needed weight.